The whisper spread before she even entered the room. Wait, the lunch lady's going to teach us math? Lena's stomach turned as laughter rippled through the air. She kept her eyes on her notebook, pretending to adjust her pencil while her heart pounded in her ears. The class smelled faintly of chalk and disinfectant, but underneath that, she caught a hint of something else. Tomato soup, fresh bread. The cafeteria, the door opened. Principal Keaton stepped inside, followed by a woman in a faded apron, her hands rough and freckled from years of kitchen work. Her hair was tied back neatly, her eyes calm and unreadable. "Students," said Principal Keaton, clearing his throat. "Due to Mr. Harper's sudden medical leave, Ms. Clara will be covering advanced calculus until a replacement is found." A pause. His voice lingered on until as if emphasizing that this was temporary, a necessary inconvenience. Then came the snickers. The disbelief. "The lunch lady? Seriously?" whispered Tom Whitfield from the front row, and the class erupted again. Lena didn't join in. She simply stared. There was something about the woman's quiet stillness that didn't fit the mockery. She didn't look nervous or angry, just composed. Clara nodded once to the principal, took the piece of chalk he offered, and turned to the board. "Page 42, she said softly. "We'll begin with limits." Her voice was calm, unhurried, not a tremor in it. No one noticed that the equations she began to write were far more advanced than what was on page 42. No one but Lena. That was the first moment the girl realized something about this woman didn't add up. Lena Patel had always been an outsider at Fairfield Academy and one of the few scholarship students among a sea of wealth. Every hallway whispered about her second-hand uniform. Every project group conveniently forgot her name. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. She'd learned to survive by shrinking herself, by being invisible, but that invisibility came at a cost. Each day she felt herself fading a little more. Every morning she arrived early, walking the cobblestone path lined with manicured hedges and marble statues of alumni who looked nothing like her. Past the shimmering swimming pool that her scholarship didn't allow her to use, past the library's tall windows where she could see students sipping lattes as they studied. And every morning, she passed the cafeteria window, where Clara could be seen stirring soup or slicing bread, always humming softly, always in rhythm. It was strange how the woman never looked tired. There was a kind of focus in her, like she was always thinking about something deeper than recipes. At the same time, across town in a small one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of old books and rain, Clara Monroe's day began at 4 a.m. sharp. She rose quietly so as not to wake her mother in the next room, a once brilliant literature professor. Now living in the slow fog of Alzheimer's, Clara brewed coffee, packed her lunch, and touched the small silver compass on her dresser before leaving. Its lid was etched with initials worn smooth by time. Her father had given it to her when she was 16 and headed to university. When you lose your way, let this remind you that true north is inside you. By 6 a.m. she was at the bakery kneading dough. By 9:45 she was in the Fairfield kitchen stirring sauce, the heat steaming her glasses. No one there knew that she had once been the youngest mathematics doctoral candidate at the National Institute of Science. No one knew that her career had ended in betrayal and scandal, that her life's work had been stolen by the man who now led Fairfield's math department. She never corrected them when they called her the lunch lady. It was easier that way. Back in class, Lena stared at the equation on the board. It was elegant, unexpected, and the way Ms. Clara explained it, connecting abstract numbers to patterns of wind and music, was unlike anything Lena had ever heard. By the end of the lesson, silence filled the room. The same students who had laughed earlier were blinking, trying to follow what had just happened. "Homework," Clara said simply, writing a problem on the board that made even the confident ones pale. Then she turned and left before anyone could question her. Lena sat frozen. Something inside her, and some dimming spark, flickered to life again. That evening in the cafeteria, Lena pushed food around her tray without appetite. Her thoughts were filled with the equations Clara had drawn, the strange beauty in them. When the woman passed by, Lena almost spoke, but before she could, Clara slipped a folded napkin beside her tray. On it, written in careful handwriting, were 6 words: Try inverting the function, not forcing it. Lena frowned, reading it again. It wasn't advice for cooking. It was math. The exact kind of hint she'd been struggling to find all week. When she looked up, Clara was already halfway down the serving line, her face calm, her movements precise. The cafeteria buzzed as usual, but to Lena, everything else had gone quiet. For the first time, she felt the thrill of a secret. That night, under the flickering light of her desk lamp, Lena worked on the problem again. The new approach opened it like a lock turning smoothly. It wasn't just a solution, it was revelation. At midnight, when she finally closed her notebook, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her heart felt alive. She whispered into the dark, "Who are you, Ms. Clara?" The next morning, the math department's bulletin board displayed a new announcement: State Mathematics Championship. Applications open. The prize: a full university scholarship. Lena stopped to read, hope bubbling up inside her before fading again. Students like her didn't win competitions like that, especially not against Tom Whitfield, Fairfield's golden boy, the son of the school board's largest donor. Inside the staff room, Principal Keaton stood with a stack of flyers, discussing the event with Dr. Harper's replacement, none other than the same man who had destroyed Clara's past, Dr. Raymond Pierce. He smiled smoothly, adjusting his tie. "I'll take over the coaching," he said. "Tom already has the makings of a champion." Behind them, unnoticed, Clara poured coffee into their cups. The steam rose like a ghost between them. "I could help," she said quietly. "I have experience with competitive mathematics." Pierce didn't even look up. "Oh, I'm sure your arithmetic is excellent, Ms. Monroe," he said, emphasizing Ms. as though it were a stain. "But this competition requires advanced understanding." Laughter rippled through the room. Principal Keaton's smile tightened. "Thank you, Clara, but let's keep your focus in the kitchen." Clara nodded, the faintest smile on her lips. She'd expected no less. But later, when the room was empty, she took one of the championship flyers and slipped it into her pocket beside the compass. Her eyes hardened. She had unfinished business. The next few days at Fairfield moved like a quiet storm gathering strength. Word about the lunch lady teacher spread through the halls like wildfire. Some mocked it. Others whispered with curiosity. Lena noticed that when Clara entered a room, even the boldest student straightened unconsciously. There was something about her presence, not loud or commanding, but steady like gravity. Lena began to notice more too. How Clara's eyes flickered when she looked at the framed photo in the hallway. A photo of Dr. Raymond Pierce accepting an award for outstanding mathematical achievement. His smile was the same as the one he wore every morning in class, smug and polished. But behind that photo, behind the plaque's shiny frame, Lena sensed a buried story waiting to be unearthed. One afternoon, while the rest of the class struggled through a proof, Lena raised her hand. "Could there be another way to approach this?" she asked. Pierce smirked. "Another way? There's the right way, Miss Patel. Everything else is a waste of time." Laughter. Again. The same old script. When class ended, Lena stayed behind, erasing the board slowly until the room was empty. Then softly she heard a voice from the hallway. "The right way," Clara said, stepping in with a faint smile, "is the one that gets you to the truth, even if it doesn't follow their map." Lena looked up. "You saw that?" "I've seen that look before," Clara replied. "The one where you start to question who wrote the rules in the first place." That was the moment an unspoken alliance began between them. Each afternoon, Lena would linger after class, pretending to study until the hallways emptied. Then she would slip into the cafeteria, where Clara waited with a stack of napkins, a piece of chalk, and sometimes leftover muffins. They didn't call it tutoring. It was something more sacred. A secret classroom built from quiet rebellion. "Start with symmetry," Clara would say, her hands moving gracefully as she drew invisible lines on the counter. "Every problem has a hidden balance. Find that, and the solution will come." Sometimes she'd smile faintly, murmuring, "Math is fair even when the world isn't." Lena didn't understand what that meant at first, but she would. Over time, Clara's calm confidence began to peel away her quiet walls. Lena's answers became bolder, her questions sharper. She started to enjoy the challenge even when it scared her. She was learning more than equations. She was learning how to see patterns where others saw limits still. The world outside their little circle didn't stop pressing in. Tom Whitfield's father, Gregory Whitfield, made sure of that. He was on the school board, his influence stretching across every decision. When he heard whispers about a cafeteria worker meddling in academics, he paid a visit to Principal Keaton. "Keaton," he said, his voice cool and deliberate, "parents are paying $30,000 a term for elite education. They expect teachers, not kitchen staff, instructing their children." Principal Keaton nodded quickly, avoiding his eyes. "It's temporary, sir." "Just until what? Until she starts a revolution?" Mr. Whitfield interrupted, lips curling. "Replace her. Now." By the time Clara left work that evening, the staff lounge was buzzing. She walked past the murmurs head high, her expression unreadable, but in her chest she could feel the familiar weight of injustice settling again. That night, while preparing soup for the next day, Clara heard a soft knock on the cafeteria door. It was Lena holding a notebook against her chest. "Ms. Clara," she said quietly, "are they going to take you out of class?" Clara smiled, weary but warm. "They can take me out of the classroom, but not out of the truth." She handed Lena a small stack of photocopied papers, handwritten notes in neat looping script filled with strange symbols and proofs. "These are my methods," Clara said. "Some people said they were too unconventional, but they work. They always did." Lena flipped through the pages, awed by the complexity and elegance of what she saw. Then something caught her eye. The header on one of the papers read, "The Monroe Convergence Method in 2007. Her eyes widened. "Monroe, that's your name." Clara's hand stilled for a moment. "Yes," Lena's mind spun. "Then, Dr. Pierce's famous paper, the one they keep referencing in class and that uses the same theory." Clara looked at her with a quiet, unflinching gaze. "Because it was mine before it was his." The words landed like thunder. Lena didn't know what to say. But she understood then why Clara's hands sometimes trembled when she picked up chalk. Why she kept that small compass in her pocket. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Lena asked softly. "Because back then," Clara replied, her voice low, "no one believed a 20-year-old girl from the South Side could outthink her professor. They called it theft, said I stole his unpublished work. My reputation was gone overnight." Silence filled the cafeteria. The hum of the refrigerators became the only sound between them. Then Clara added, "I took the job here because I knew he worked at Fairfield. I wanted to see if I could still teach, still make a difference even if no one knew my name." Lena reached across the table. "You do make a difference." Clara smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. "Then let's prove it." That night they began their first midnight session. Under the pale light of the kitchen, they transformed metal countertops into chalkboards. Equations spread like constellations across the surfaces. Clara's explanations were quiet and precise, her mind a river of logic, and Lena followed eagerly, her pen flying, her pulse quickening with every new discovery. They didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of a storm that would shake the walls of Fairfield. And nothing, not power, not wealth, not a stolen name, would stop it. The secret lessons grew into something sacred. Each night, Lena met Clara in the dim light of the cafeteria kitchen, where the scent of rising bread mixed with the soft scratch of pencils and the low hum of refrigerators. The counters became their blackboards, the flour-dusted surfaces covered in swirling equations that looked like constellations. Clara taught with precision but never pressure. "Every number has a rhythm," she said one night, kneading dough between explanations. "If you listen long enough, you'll hear it." Lena started to hear it, not just in equations, but in life. She began walking differently, speaking differently, raising her hand in class with quiet boldness. Each correct answer felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. But change draws attention, and attention at Fairfield could be dangerous. Dr. Pierce began watching her more closely. His compliments turned sharp-edged. "Impressive work, Miss Patel," he said one day, adjusting his glasses. "Almost too impressive. You must have a very dedicated tutor." Lena kept her face neutral. "Just studying hard, sir." He smiled thinly. "Hard work only takes people so far." That evening, when Lena told Clara what had happened, Clara's expression darkened. "He's starting to suspect. We'll need to be careful." But Lena shook her head. "He's not the one who should be afraid." For the first time, Clara saw something fierce behind the girl's quiet eyes, a fire that refused to be contained. The next morning, a new problem appeared on the classroom board, one far more complex than anything before. "Today," said Pierce, "we'll test the limits of your understanding." He watched Lena as he said it. The question was brutal, layered with traps that could mislead even seasoned mathematicians. But Lena had seen this kind of construction before. It was a mirror image of the techniques Clara had shown her, methods that Pierce had once claimed as his own. When he called her to the board, the room went silent. Her chalk trembled slightly at first, but then she remembered Clara's voice. Find the balance. Find the truth. Step by step, she worked through the proof, flipping Pierce's approach on its head. In 5 minutes, she had solved what the rest of the class couldn't start. Pierce's face turned pale. The class erupted in whispers. "That's not possible," he muttered, staring at the solution that bore his signature method, but somehow improved. Later that afternoon, he stormed into the faculty lounge, slamming his briefcase onto the table. "She's cheating," he hissed to Principal Keaton. "That girl is using stolen material." "My material?" "Raymond," Keaton said cautiously. "Do you have proof?" "I will," Pierce snapped, already planning his next move. That night, as Lena and Clara worked quietly in the kitchen, Mrs. Collins, the elderly librarian who had been at Fairfield longer than anyone, slipped in through the back door. Her gray hair was tied up, her eyes sharp behind thin spectacles. "Evening, Clara," she said, setting down a stack of old folders. "You'll want to see these." Lena looked up, startled. "You know her?" Mrs. Collins smiled. "I taught her once upon a time." Inside the folders were papers older than Lena herself, faded, hand-annotated drafts bearing the title, The Monroe Convergence Theorem. Date 2007, author Clara Monroe. Advisor Dr. Raymond Pierce. Lena's chest tightened as she flipped through the pages. The same symbols, the same methods, the same insight, all of it stolen. Mrs. Collins sighed. He submitted a version under his name 3 months later. I tried to speak up, but no one listened. I was a librarian, not a scientist. And he was already climbing the ladder. Clara ran her fingers over the yellowed paper. "I thought every copy was destroyed." "I kept one," Mrs. Collins said simply. "I knew this day would come." Clara closed the folder gently. "Then it's time to finish what he started under my name." Over the next 2 weeks, the midnight lessons turned into something more. Preparation not only for the state championship, but for a reckoning. Clara taught Lena every theorem she had ever created, pushing her further than she had ever been pushed before. "When you stand there," Clara said one night, "you're not just solving numbers. You're proving something bigger. That truth belongs to everyone who seeks it, not those who steal it." By the end of the final session, Lena's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Meanwhile, Pierce was unraveling. He prowled the halls like a shadow, watching Lena from doorways, intercepting her tests, inventing excuses to question her grades. His arrogance began to crack under the strain of his fear. One afternoon, he cornered her outside the library. "I know what you're doing," he said, voice low and venomous. "And I know who's helping you." Lena stood her ground. "Then you know you're afraid of the right people." His jaw tightened. "You think one competition can undo me? I built this school's reputation. I built everything." She looked at him calmly. "Then maybe it's time someone tore it down." That night, Clara found Lena already waiting in the kitchen, determination blazing in her eyes. "He knows," Lena said. Clara nodded. "Good, let him watch. He's about to see what honesty looks like when it wins." They began to prepare for the championship, the kitchen filled with the quiet music of chalk, the scent of coffee, and the whisper of rebellion written in formulas. For Clara, this wasn't just about mathematics anymore. It was about reclaiming her name. For Lena, it was about proving that brilliance could come from anywhere, even from a girl the world tried to overlook. And as the night stretched toward dawn, neither of them noticed the shadow outside the door, Dr. Pierce listening. The morning of the championship arrived under a cold, clear sky that felt charged with something unseen. Banners fluttered outside the State Science Auditorium. Reporters moved between the crowds, microphones flashing as they interviewed the schools lined up for registration. Lena stood among them, notebook pressed against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. It felt unreal. Only weeks ago, she had been eating lunch alone while people laughed about the cafeteria substitute. Now she stood as Fairfield's official representative, chosen only after the other students dropped out. Thanks to pressure Pierce called strategic reallocation. He had no idea that strategy would destroy him. Across the room, Clara sat quietly among the spectators wearing a simple navy dress. She was not listed as a coach. She wasn't even supposed to be there. But the moment Lena caught sight of her, she felt a rush of calm. That small nod from Clara was enough. It said everything words couldn't. The competition began with easier rounds, problems meant to warm up the field. Lena's hands were steady, her mind sharp. Numbers unfolded in her head like poetry, the logic moving through her fingers before she could even second-guess herself. But the real test came in the final round. The challenge appeared on the screen, a proof so intricate it made the audience murmur. Even some of the judges leaned closer, frowning at the notation. Dr. Pierce smiled in the corner of the judges' area. He had written that problem himself. It wasn't just difficult, it was deliberately constructed to trap her. Lena froze for a heartbeat, staring at the symbols. The air felt too thin, the noise too loud. Then she reached into her pocket and touched the cool metal of Clara's compass. She remembered the late-night whisper. Math isn't about following paths. It's about creating one. She took a breath, looked up, and began. Instead of attacking the problem directly, she turned it on its head, transforming it, reorienting it, just as Clara had taught her. Lines of logic bloomed across her workspace. Each equation built upon the last, elegant and natural. A strange hush filled the room as the judges stopped whispering. By the time she drew the final line under her proof, the air felt electric. The clock hit 0. Time, the moderator called. The competitors stepped back. Judges moved between the boards. Dr. Pierce's smile faltered as they reached Lena's work. He could see it already, the method, the precision, the unmistakable fingerprints of the theorem he had stolen. He stepped forward, voice cutting through the quiet. "This is not her work," he said sharply. "This approach is derived from my published research. It's impossible for her to have developed it independently." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras turned. Lena looked up. "You mean your research that looks exactly like the Monroe theorem?" The name hung in the air like a spark about to ignite a wildfire. "What did you say?" he demanded. "I said it's not yours," Lena replied, voice steady. "It belongs to the person you erased." She turned toward the audience. To her. Every head turned to follow her gaze toward Clara. Clara rose slowly, her eyes locked on the man who had destroyed her life. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Pierce's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he said, trying to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. "She's a cafeteria worker, for God's sake. A fraud." Before he could say another word, Mrs. Collins stood from the back row holding a leather-bound folder. "No, Dr. Pierce," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the noise. "The fraud was yours." She handed the folder to one of the judges. Inside were copies of Clara's original thesis, the drafts bearing Pierce's handwritten annotations and dates predating his publication. There were letters, too, old brittle correspondence between Clara and her advisor, where he praised her unpublished brilliance. The head judge read in silence, eyes narrowing. "These documents are convincing." Cameras clicked. Reporters surged forward. Pierce tried to grab the folder, but the judge pulled it away. "Dr. Pierce," she said firmly, "I think we'll need to verify this immediately." Lena stood in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. Years of lies, of theft and silence were unraveling before her eyes. Clara's gaze never wavered. "You said I would disappear," she said quietly, stepping forward. "But truth doesn't vanish. It waits." Pierce's composure shattered. He turned on her, voice trembling. "You destroyed my career. I gave you one," Clara interrupted. "You just forgot who built it for you." Security appeared at the back of the auditorium as reporters shouted questions. Pierce tried to protest, but his words drowned beneath the noise. He stumbled toward the exit as cameras followed, his legacy collapsing in real time. When the chaos subsided, the head judge stepped to the microphone. "After review," she announced, "contestant number 15, Lena Patel, is confirmed as the rightful winner of this year's State Mathematics Championship. Her method is valid, original, and—" She looked directly at Clara, deeply inspired. The room erupted in applause. Clara's hands shook slightly as she pressed them over her heart. Lena turned, searching for her in the crowd. When their eyes met, Clara smiled. A real, radiant smile she hadn't worn in 15 years. "You did it," Lena whispered. Clara shook her head, tears glimmering. "No, we did." Outside the auditorium, the news spread like fire. The story of a lunch lady who once changed mathematics and the student who helped her reclaim it hit every local feed within hours. By evening, national outlets were running the headline, "Forgotten Genius Exposes Academic Fraud During Live Competition." But for Clara, the victory wasn't about headlines. It was about breathing again, about being seen without shame. That night, she stood in the empty cafeteria where it had all begun. The air was still, the tables clean, the scent of fresh bread fading. She opened the compass in her palm, watching the needle settle toward north. Lena stepped inside quietly, holding the trophy in both hands. "I thought this belonged to you," she said, offering it. Clara smiled. "No, Lena, that one's yours. Mine's already found its way home." The two stood there in silence, teacher and student bound not by rank or title, but by truth, and far beyond the academy walls. Something had shifted, a small but powerful correction in the world's equation. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day refused to fade. The story of Clara Monroe and Lena Patel spread across campuses and classrooms like wildfire. Newspapers wrote about the brilliance buried by bias. Professors debated the ethics of academia on morning talk shows, and young students began sending letters, some thanking Clara for giving them courage, others asking her how to start over when the world had already decided their limits. For the first time in years, Clara didn't hide her name. Her work, once buried under someone else's fame, was republished under its rightful author. The Monroe Method was now cited in journals worldwide, a quiet correction to 15 years of deceit. But Clara's satisfaction didn't come from the recognition. It came from walking into the same classroom where she had once been dismissed and seeing it filled with students who finally believed brilliance could come from anywhere. Fairfield changed, slowly but unmistakably. Gone were the portraits of uniform success that once lined the hallways. In their place, the school hung photographs of diverse alumni, scholars, artists, innovators from all walks of life. There was even a new scholarship plaque on the main corridor wall, the Monroe Patel Fellowship for Emerging Minds. Lena stood beneath it on the morning of her graduation, her cap slightly crooked, her mother's proud smile bright through tears. She turned as Clara approached, wearing a modest navy coat, her silver compass glinting faintly from her pocket. "They finally named a scholarship after you," Lena said, grinning. Clara chuckled softly. "After us," she corrected. "The fellowship wasn't meant for people who already have everything. It's for the ones who keep showing up even when no one claps for them." Lena's smile wavered. "I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Clara looked at her gently. "Maybe not. But I couldn't have stood up again without you either." They stood in silence for a while, watching students gather for the ceremony. The air carried the sound of laughter, the flutter of gowns, the hum of possibility. When Lena stepped up to the podium to deliver the valedictory speech, her hands trembled only once. "I used to think success was about being seen," she began, her voice carrying through the courtyard, "about being the loudest or the brightest. But I learned that sometimes the people who change everything are the ones no one notices, the ones who sweep the halls, who teach without titles, who fight quietly for truth. They remind us that genius doesn't always wear a name tag." She paused, glancing at Clara in the crowd. "When you meet someone who believes in you before you believe in yourself, don't forget them. Carry their lessons like a compass, because those lessons will guide you when the path disappears." Applause thundered through the courtyard. Clara wiped her eyes, the faintest smile breaking through the emotion that had been sitting quietly inside her for too long. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, a group of students approached Clara with notebooks in hand. "Ms. Monroe," one of them said shyly, "will you be teaching the advanced seminar next term?" Clara looked surprised, then laughed, a sound lighter than it had been in years. "I suppose I will," she said. Later that evening, she visited her mother at the care center. The room was quiet, sunlight spilling gently through the curtains. Her mother's eyes opened slowly as Clara took her hand. "You're back," her mother whispered, voice thin but warm. You found your way, Clara smiled through tears. You always knew I would. The old woman nodded faintly, her gaze softening. And the girl? The one who reminds you of yourself? She's going to change the world, Clara said. Maybe she already has. When she left, the sun was setting in a wash of gold. The air smelled faintly of bread and chalk dust, the sense of two lives that had once seemed small but had filled the world with meaning. That night, Lena and Clara met one last time in the cafeteria, their classroom, their battlefield, their sanctuary. The lights hummed softly overhead. I'll be leaving for university tomorrow, Lena said, resting her hand on the counter that had once been their chalkboard. But I'll come back. You'll see. Clara smiled. You don't owe me visits, just promises. Promise you'll keep asking questions no one else dares to. I promise, Lena said quietly. Clara took the compass from her pocket and set it on the counter between them. It was my father's, she said. Then mine. Now it's yours. Lena's eyes widened. I can't take that. You can, Clara said gently. Because it's not just a compass. It's a reminder. No matter how lost you feel, truth has direction. Find it, follow it, and you'll never really lose your way. Lena closed her fingers around the metal, feeling its weight. Thank you. When she looked up again, Clara was smiling through tears. Go make something beautiful, she whispered. Years later, that compass would sit on Lena's desk in a university office bearing her name. Dr. Lena Patel, Department of Theoretical Mathematics. Students from every background would line up outside her door, eager to learn the same lesson Clara once taught her, that brilliance needs no permission. And every time she explained a concept that made their eyes widen, she'd catch herself saying words that didn't sound like her own. Math is fair, she'd tell them softly, even when the world isn't. Outside, the sky would darken into evening, and she'd open the compass just to watch the needle steady itself. In that tiny swing toward true north, she would see all the roads that led her here. The laughter, the hurt, the long nights, the stolen proof, the courage of a woman who refused to stay erased. And she would whisper not to the room, not to anyone else, but to the memory of the lunch lady who once picked up the chalk and changed everything. Thank you, Clara. Then she would turn back to the board, lift her own piece of chalk, and begin again writing truth back into the world. One elegant line at a time. Years later, the world began to remember Clara Monroe not just as a woman wronged, but as a pioneer. Universities cited her restored papers in lectures. Young mathematicians studied her elegant proofs with the same reverence once reserved for historical geniuses. The story of the forgotten scholar had become a case study in ethics and resilience. But for Clara, fame meant little. She had learned to live quietly, shaping futures instead of chasing recognition. Yet one winter morning, a letter arrived that made her hands tremble. The envelope bore the seal of the International Mathematics Society. Inside was a single page, the kind printed on thick ivory paper. She had been nominated for the Euler Prize, one of the highest honors in mathematics, for her original work on nonlinear convergence and its lasting influence on modern theory. For a long time, Clara just stared at the words, the way a person stares at the horizon after walking through a storm. Her mother had passed away a year earlier. Lena now taught at the university. The life Clara once lost had quietly rebuilt itself piece by piece, but she had never imagined this. At the award ceremony, she stood beneath lights brighter than she'd ever known, facing an audience filled with scholars and former critics. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I spent many years thinking I'd been erased, she said, but the truth is no one can erase what's already written in the pattern of things. Math doesn't forget. It simply waits for the right eyes to see it again. In the crowd, Lena watched with tears in her eyes. When Clara's name was called and the applause thundered through the hall, she saw not a woman reclaimed by history, but one who had finally stepped back into her rightful place. Calm, dignified, and utterly unshaken. After the ceremony, they met outside under a night sky scattered with stars. Clara looked up, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. I never thought I'd see this day, she said. You earned it a long time ago. Lena replied softly. The world just needed time to catch up. Clara smiled faintly. It's funny. After everything, the only thing I really wanted was to teach again, and to see students like you walking freely into places that used to feel locked. You opened the doors, Lena said. We just walked through them. Months later, Clara's work inspired a new institute, the Monroe Center for Mathematical Equity, dedicated to funding underrepresented minds in STEM. Her story became the foundation of its mission to make sure no one's brilliance was buried again. In one of the center's lecture halls hung a framed photograph, Clara, smiling beside Lena, chalk on their hands, the compass between them gleaming faintly in the light. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, "Truth waits, but it never dies." On a quiet evening, long after the building had emptied, Lena sometimes returned there. She'd sit in the back row, close her eyes, and listen to the faint echoes of chalk on board, that soft, rhythmic sound that had once changed her life. And in that sound, she always heard Clara's voice, "Find the balance, find the truth." Years turned, seasons shifted, and new generations came. Students who had never known the full story still spoke her name with quiet respect. Clara Monroe, the woman who taught the world that brilliance doesn't fade, it only waits for courage to uncover it. And somewhere, as the moonlight fell across the empty classroom, that old compass still rested on the shelf near the window. The needle pointed north, unwavering, steady, as if guarding a promise made long ago by two women who believed that even the smallest voice could change the direction of the world.